solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
We looked and we're like, Northern Michigan. And we went to a World War II icebreaker, or World War II minesweeper turned icebreaker.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The ship, I mean, it's sick.
It turned 60 while we were on board.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
where was the icebreaker operate? Like on the Great Lakes?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So people don't realize, but like 60% of the heating oil for the East Coast actually comes down through the Great Lakes. And so you got to, in the winter, you have to keep the ice broken up and make sure those ships can get through. And then in the summer, there's all sorts of buoys and aids to navigation that you had to handle. So that was my first tour. A lot of driving the ship, man, really close to, show water and learning how to do naval ship handling. And so back then everyone had to go to ships, right? So now if you go to the academy, you can come out and go right to flight school or go right to other jobs in service. But back then the rule was everyone had to go to a ship. So I did that. Then I went up to Alaska, went on another ship. I'm a polar bear by heart. We're about to hit my favorite season, winter, coming up here. And so went north to Alaska. It's great. That's the wild frontier. It's an amazing spot to be at. Great. Some people might think it's a great place to raise kids and stuff. I tend to think it's a great place to be single and in your 20s and that you can live the adventure. We went all the way out the Aleutian chain. We took the ship to Hawaii and back. I was listening to one of your other, the Navy guys talking, and people always struggle, like, why do we even have a Coast Guard? And I always just like to remind them because even the Navy needs heroes. So the Navy guy was talking, he was just your last podcast, and I was talking about like, I did all these deployments. And we, every year in the Coast Guard, if you're on a ship, you're underway for 6 months out of the year, every year. So you're gone 6 months. I'm on a ship for 2 years in Alaska. I was gone 6 months, home, gone 6 months again. That's the way it is. We call that going to work. The Navy calls that deployment. We're like, that's just what you do. So yeah, got a lot of sea time in my first 4 years. Did the traditional boarding officer. So like in Alaska, fisheries is a multi-billion-dollar industry in Alaska. So you go out, board the vessels, make sure they're not catching things illegally, making sure it's just really a problem right now, actually. Chinese and Russian vessels are coming up and coming into U.S. economic waters, U.S. EEZ, and harvesting our fish. And they do not care. They just rape the ocean floor. Whereas we have like economic allowances and we count the fish and all that sort of stuff. So we would cite them, push them out, patrol to keep them away, and did that. And then that led to me going to grad school. And that was really like the launch point for what became, that was fun and exciting and I loved it. But that became for what launched me into the rest of my life and how we get to today. I made the mistake of asking, who's my network? All the people that are like retired Coast Guard that are like in my vicinity, right? Or they'd gotten out of the military, NSA, Cybercom, and they're back in it, contractors up there. And so all these guys are like, dude, you can get crazy. You could be a GS-13, a GS-14 or whatever. I'm like, if I want to be a GS-13, why wouldn't I just stay in? Like, A. B, they're like, oh, you can be a contractor. And so I actually started to do that contractor route. And I would encourage anybody thinking of getting out, look at where you're going to live. So if you're not going to just stay wherever you're getting out, take the BAH, take your pay, take COLA, any of the other allowances, add it all in there. Okay. Add in what is that maximum amount of money, figure out what that take-home pay is. So post-taxes, take-home pay. So remember, BAH isn't taxed. Come back the other way, and this is where those online Excel spreadsheet classes help out. Go back the other way and then say, okay, what if BAH was taxed? So what type of outside the military income level would I have to make that then would get me that same level of take-home pay? and then add in $300 to $500 a month for healthcare. Add in, don't forget any money you were putting in your TSP versus a 401k, right? You have to start doing that math. And I found out that in the DC area, if you were in 04 back in 2016, you needed to make 161-ish to have the same level of take-home pay out of the military, to have the same level of take-home pay that an 04 would have, right? And so that math, you figured out at the 06 level, it's like you need to make about 205. And so then you start doing contract work or getting interviews and they're like, we'll bring you in 157, 158. And I'm like, I'm going to be making less. And all these guys that were telling me you can make all this money, what they were really saying was, hey, I'm retired, so I'm making 157 plus my retirement check on top. And so you're really not making all that money. Your retirement check is adding to it. So you have to start thinking it in that regard and realize that your network is actually a very insular network, and they're just telling you what they know the world to be like. And if you want to be them, then sure, follow in those footsteps. And so I realized that because going through Breakline, and Breakline was like opened my mind of what the world of possibilities were. It really was a life-changing experience. And Bethany, I still keep in touch with the founder. I told her it changed my life going there and understanding what's really out there, how to navigate the world. And so I thank her to this day for it. And I know it was game-changing for Gabe too. So figure out the backwards math of where you want to live and what's that going to be like. Then you can start to narrow in the industries, because sometimes I feel like we have fictitious ideas of where like people are like, oh, I want to live on the Outer Banks or like Wilmington, North Carolina, and I'm gonna be a life coach, and I need to make 225. And I'm like the average income in Wilmington, North Carolina is nowhere near 225. And then if you're a life coach, dude, none of those things add up, right? So you really gotta sit back and assess that. That starts to bring in the world of what's really possible, right? And if you don't know your career path, think about where you want to live and just look up what are the average salaries and that type of stuff in the area. And then you start to figure out what's realistic to get there. But then the other things I found is you really have to get outside of your normal network, right? If I wanted to be no colonel left behind, right, in the Pentagon, when you're in that environment and you're talking to those people, you're going to get those types of answers. So you have to get totally out of that environment and talk to people that don't do anything like that don't work in the military industrial complex, or you will end up back into it. So knowing what you want to do, that's useful. And then the other thing that I found very useful, and I learned this from a little bit of military, but a little bit of my Wharton network. I'm looking at positions at a company. Let's just say you wanted to go to IBM, right? I'm just picking IBM. You want to move up to the executive level. You're like, I want to be a leader there. I want to move. Look who's at that level now. If there's no middle-aged dad bod white dudes there, you're not going to be it. But even this, say they're all 75-year-old white dudes. Guess what? You're not going to be the first 42-year-old white dude to break into that circle. That's going to be if you stay there, then when you're 75, you'll have a shot at that level. Like, you got to understand that the reflection of the ages and of what those people did in their backgrounds will then transpire. Like, you will not break the mold. I'm sorry. Like, it's rare to be the unicorn. I hope you are, but try to stack the deck in your favor. And so find a place where you can see that pathway. And then so going from there, and you're starting to identify companies you want to work at, and you start there, work your way down, like on LinkedIn, and run it like an intelligence op. What did these people do? Where did they go to school? What can you find out about these people if you're moving to a new area? literally Google and be like, oh, they all live in this part of town, right? Like, I mean, provided it's not like New York City or something where it's a little bit harder. But if you can start to narrow those things down, you will find intersections that you're like, oh, they have 3 kids. I have 3 kids. Good. That's a relatable thing. So now if I go on the interview, I see that most of these people in these jobs have 2 to 3 kids or whatever, a number of kids. Sounds like it could be family friendly, right? Sounds like they're not going to be cranking me at 7 p.m. when everyone knows it's dinner time or soccer practice or whatever, right? Like those types of things you can find out by going through LinkedIn, looking at the people there, looking at those roles, and essentially running it like an intelligence op to get some just basic information on what's the motives, what's the character, what type of people work there. And that becomes such a valuable tool during your interview process. And then especially when you're trying to find other intersections. Like I'll go to a company if I'm trying to apply to it. Do I know anyone that knows anyone working at that company? Like they could be in a totally different field. And it helps. I worked at BP. I worked cyber intelligence. I was a first level executive at BP doing that. I got that job because my quarterback on my football team, who had gotten out, he was working on BP on oil rigs, right? And he was looking through the job board, internal job board. He sees this cyber intel job posted. And I'm like, dude, who's the hiring manager? So he puts the hiring manager, sends it to me. He sends the guy an email. I hit the guy on LinkedIn. I looked at his background. I'm like, hey, I heard you have this job. I'm interested in it. If you can make it available outside of BP, I'd love to apply. We start talking. He worked in the IC. He knew I was at the IC. We ended up knowing. We found a nexus. It was an executive position at a Fortune 10. Interview process ends up being 6 months long. But like eventually we got there and I went to BP, and let me tell you, it's a phenomenal company. It was an amazing experience. I learned so much.
How did you recalibrate for the second round to end up at BP in a job that you really enjoyed? What kind of soul searching were you able to do to refine your process for round 2?
So I looked for people that had been in government I said I looked for, at this point you've narrowed down the types of jobs you're looking for, right? So you're not holistically saying the world, and you're down in this little sphere. And so then I'd look at like companies and I'd be like, hey, does anybody there, like, were they a veteran? Did they work in the government before at some point in their life, no matter how long or how far? Can I find these people? And I would cold hit them or find somebody that knew them and be like, hey, do you have a moment? Can you tell me about your career? I'm interested in the company. I've looked at your career path. I think it's really interesting. Do you have a minute to catch up? Can we do a video call, or can I meet you somewhere and talk about it? And thankfully, we all love to talk about ourselves. So like people were happy to do it. And you find some of the most interesting things, and you actually find mentors, right? Because like people want to help. I find that is a uniquely American thing. Around the world, you can find other people that are like, hey, come to dinner at my house, come sit with us. We'd love to have you as a guest. You don't necessarily find people that are career minded, right? In America, we're very occupationally driven. But in that, we want to help other people find work success as well. And so people were like, yeah, happy to talk to you about my career. And then that turns into, no, that sounded interesting to you? Let me hook you up with Joe, Bob, Betty, Sue, whoever. And you start having that second and third level conversation. And inevitably, it'll turn into an opportunity, maybe for a role. If you've read some of these stories like Freakonomics or whatever, it's that loose connection, right? So it's not your best friend that hires you, but it's like your best friend's high school friend or whatever. It's like that 1-2 away. And that is incredibly helpful.
Do you think that there should be any kind of decoupling of the concept of occupationally driven culture for people when they're getting out of the military? Or do you think that is a thing that is okay?
So it is somewhat of an interesting issue. I think that it's okay, and that's what drives people to change the world. That's what drives American exceptionalism. And I, not everybody believes in American exceptionalism. I believe in American exceptionalism. Like, I want us to be the greatest nation on earth forever in history of all time. And no questions asked. And I think it takes work for us to get there and then continue to be there and continue to grow as a nation, right? And so I encourage that not decoupling. But here's the problem, right? And I've run into it myself, right? So I transition out of the military. I go to BP. I'm like, when you transition out of the military, and I can only speak my experience, but in a mid-grade to anywhere from '03 to '05, you have an expertise. I was a good ship driver, and then I became a good cyber person, whatever you want to call it, right? You Air Force would call it warrior, but cyber warfighter. So you have that skill, and you want to hit the ground running. Like, you're like, man, I was just leading troops. I was just doing this. People come to me as the reference. How do we do these things? How do we figure this out? I can crank this out online. I could rip out awards. I can rip out, I can do anything that needs to be done. You go in the private sector and you're like, first couple of weeks, you get your training and all that sort of stuff. But then you start to see your cohort, your like coworkers, colleagues, and some of them are crushing it. And you like quickly identify, you're like, that person's got it. That person's got it. And you're still like, I don't know. And so you try to like rapid fire and crush through things. What happens is you're like on steroids. Like the first about it starts hitting you like 4 to 8 weeks in. You're like, I need to be doing something. Whatever your job is. I need to generate leads. I'm going to call 90 people today. Right? Like, or maybe you're an analyst or something. You're like, I'm going to crank this out. I'm going to do all this. And you're like spinning, and you realize you're not like getting there because you don't have the expertise yet, because you were hired for your capability to be something, right? That's what you should be hired for. The employer knows it will take you a minute to establish that self-actualization, right? Maslow. And yet we want to be there already. We're like, I was an operator in the military. I was a warfighter. I was a ship driver. I was a fighter pilot. And now you're like, so I was hitting it like 4 months in. We have this like company meeting for my like team, and I'm with my boss, and we're like out, I kind of pull him aside and we go out, and I'm like, I'm just not getting this, man. Like, am I doing okay? Because also in the private sector, like, in the military, it's like, Billy, yesterday you were dragging ass. You need to pick it up this week. And you're like, immediate feedback, aye, boss.
Exactly.
In the private sector, you're like, am I doing okay? Anybody?
Somebody tell me if I'm doing good.
Yeah, nobody. Everybody's, they're like, dude, I'm working on my own stuff. I don't have time to talk to you. And you're like, there's no like immediate feedback mechanism. And so like literally 4 or 5 months in, I'm like telling my wife, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, how am I doing? Meanwhile, on the outside, I'm a first level executive at BP. All my like other friends are like, dude, Sean's killing it. He's figured it out. He cracked the code. And I'm like, dude, I don't know if they're going to fire me next week. And that's like, I had that, like, some people call that like imposter syndrome or whatever. But I have a lot of buddies getting out right now. And I'm telling them, one of them, he's working in sales. And he's like putting holes in his keyboard, sending emails and stuff. I'm like, dude, slow it down. Sending 10 emails a day to your connections is not going to make them buy your stuff more. Reel it in. And he came to me after 2 weeks. He's like, dude, my boss just said the same thing to me. He's like, slow it down. The sales will come. Just learn the system, learn the product, learn the company. And so we have that like feeling. And it doesn't necessarily go away though, right? In this era of moving jobs, right? So after 2 years at BP, I went back in the government. I was on the National Security Council, and then I moved over and I was in SES at DOE. Ran energy security for the country. But then I shifted back again to the private sector. And I don't necessarily think it like fully goes away. I've had some long talks with my wife and some others where people are like, Sean, you just hit like home run after home run. And I'll tell you, like this last time when I left the government, I was at a tech startup, Silicon Valley AI company, hot to trot, all that. Yes, the Silicon Valley, balloon did pop, and it did for the company too. I was like, and I thought, I was going to make it a pretty penny, and ultimately I did not. Still working. But I was like, I thought I'm trying to build these things. And you have that same almost reinvented question of like, why can't I hit that home run that I was hitting consistently in the military? And you forget, especially like you and I, we went through the academy. We had 4 years of minor league baseball preparing for the majors. Then we had your initial tours. Like, we forget that in your first tour, like in my first tour, I was like, man, I think I suck at this. I'm doing terrible. Like all these enlisted guys hate me. And then you start hitting and you forget about those moments. You only remember like the last 3 years you were in the service and you're like, dude, I killed it those years. When I left government again, I really had a struggle there because I was at the Department of Energy and I was a political appointee in the SES role. And because that's those senior roles, they're all political appointees. And to me, I'm like, dude, the president is asking me to do something in cybersecurity. Hell yeah, I'm doing it. You know what I mean? That's military people. What do you do? Commander in chief says do something, do it, right? And you ended up finding out that at that level, there's so many more politics involved. It's not like in the Coast Guard, there's people that didn't like me and didn't like that I pushed cyber, but they didn't stab me in the back. Do you know what I mean? Like I knew that they didn't like what I was doing. And if they were in charge, they could say, I'm not doing that. Right? In the political civilian side, in the politics process, they will like literally stab you and do different things to defame you or remove you from your position. And so that was like an identity hit. And so when I came out, somebody ended up making an accusation on my clearance that was totally bullshit. The person that made the accusation wasn't even in the building the day that it occurred, the day that they said that something happened. I'm like, dude, you weren't even here. Yeah. And so I ended up getting it. I had to file an IG. I had to hire a lawyer. And I ended up like, I have a full TSCI and all that stuff. But it was like a massive like hit. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to do the right thing for the country here. And like our own people are stabbing us, right? And so that started me on like a negative path. And it's like you start down that spiral, you get into your job after that, you're not seeing the success that you thought, right? And you're like, why can't I get anything moving forward the right way? And so then what do? You start gaining weight, you're not eating right, sleeping right. And so, I went through like that period, became the fattest I've ever been in my life. and just like super irritable, like angry person. We went on family vacation that year, but afterwards, it's like the vacation we don't talk about. Like, well, I was like, that was a terrible vacation. Yeah. But some of the things that kind of snapped me out of it was, sounds strange and ridiculous, but it's accountability. And I got this Fitbit or Whoop band. Sorry, I don't want to advertise the wrong one. I got a Whoop band, and I was like, you know what? My brother-in-law has one. I'm just gonna see what it tells me. And it's, dude, you're sleeping 4 hours or less a night. You're like in the red all the time. Your resting heart rate is 90 every day. All of your markers are terrible. And you feel terrible because of that. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, I'm getting 4 or 5 hours sleep. It's fine. I've been doing that. Been doing that for forever. I can handle it. And you're like, hey, I'm not 22 anymore. And I'm not also like in good physical shape. I'm 42 and like, and so then I slowly just started setting like markers for myself. Okay, I'm going to get my sleep average above 5 hours and then above 6 hours. Right. So now I'm like 6 hours and 5 minutes. I'm trying to keep going up. So I started getting that. And then I'm like, I'm going to go to the gym a minimum 5 days a week or 3 days a week, then 5 days a week. Then I'm like, oh, I'm going to add some running and not just lift weights because I'm a meathead, right? So for me, I would just go and I'll just lift weights every time, right? Grow. Yeah. So I started thinking like, dude, maybe being 240 pounds at 6 feet and 40 years old is not the best thing to do for the rest of your life. And so I started moving in that direction, and I found other people, right? So one of my buddies and I, we always are like accountable. Hey man, we got this reunion and we're going to see each other in October or whatever. Dude, what are you going to look like? You got to start getting there. And like once a week, hey, I stayed on my diet. I got to the gym 6 out of 7 days or 5 out of 7 days or whatever. And you find a couple different people that will like push you in that direction. And obviously alcohol consumption is a part of that too, right? Like as you feel worse, you're drinking more and you got to start getting go back the other way. And like, to me, that's how I've walked the dog backwards, is like basically forcing yourself to be accountable to other people.
Hey, everybody. I really hope that you liked this supercut of the Post-Military Podcast. If you did and you want to see more, I would recommend that you check out the whole episode, which is here on YouTube and also on multiple different podcasting platforms. If you like this and you want to support the channel, I would ask that you give the video a like, subscribe, and share the content with those who might need to hear it. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.